It's the week ending Saturday, the 3rd of November, and this is The Week Unwrapped, brought to you by Barclays Corporate Banking. In the past 7 days, we've seen Angela Merkel announcing she will not run again for the German Chancellorship. We've seen a mass shooting at a synagogue in Pittsburgh on the eve of the US midterms, and the winner of the Great British Bake Off announced. And I'm not going to say it here, just in case any of you are still catching up. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team are Jamie Timson, Cameron Tait, and from the Week Junior, it's Felicity Capon. And Felicity, you're starting the show this week. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Is this the week we learnt that the human cloud is in fact pie in the sky?
Back in the day when I was working full-time, I actually had a different role when I was more of a client-facing role. And you could be spoken to in any which way you wanted to be spoken to. It was up to the client.
What, people would be rude to you?
Yeah, really ruthlessly rude and quite cutting and very demanding. In this role, I'm fully empowered. If someone's disrespectful, someone doesn't like what you do, then obviously that you try and negotiate and work it out. But if someone's immediately rude, then I can immediately push back and say, well, hold on, nobody talks to me like that.
Graphic designer Martin Harling-Coward speaking to BBC Newsnight's David Grossman this week. And we're talking about the gig economy, Felicity. What's the latest?
We are, but not quite as you know it. This was an opinion piece that appeared in the Financial Times this week, written by Sarah O'Connor. And she's talking about another type of gig economy platform, which is being called the human cloud. And what is the human cloud, you might ask? It's a global marketplace for online labour, and it's a phenomenon that's sort of happening out of sight and out of the control of politicians. So the basic premise is that you might be wanting to start a business, say, like a bakery or a T-shirt design business, something like that.
Well, let's take a voiceover business, hypothetically. Not that I'm using this podcast to learn things that might be useful for my career.
Yeah, so it's kind of it's something like a white-collar job that needs breaking down into a series of tasks or projects or assignments. So it's not really like your Uber or your Deliveroo. It's more like you might need someone to design a logo on the website. You might need someone to build the website. You might need someone to do the marketing.
Yeah.
And you can go to these online platforms such as Upwork, Freelancer or Fiverr and find individual people who are going to do these skilled tasks for you.
Okay, but I've seen posters advertising these sorts of companies on the London Underground for years now. What's new about this?
Well, I personally have never ever heard of the human cloud, and it's massively underreported. I've only seen 2 articles in the FT, one from this year, one from a couple of years back. So I think it's a really big story that's hugely flying under the radar and could have huge global implications for the world of work. Also, can I just say, Fiverr is so weird. Have you been on Fiverr? It is bizarre. I'll give you examples of what the skills that you can pay for. One is offering her talents. I will cast a potent love psychic spell on the person of your choice for £8.17. I will create an irresistible online dating profile for you starting from £24.52. So there's lots going on.
We have been looking for a new sponsor for this podcast, haven't we, actually? So
those are some very specific prices as well. £8.17 for a love spell.
The market dictates, Cameron.
Well, as Sarah O'Connor describes it, it's a bit like an eBay for labour. So one of the problems is that you're sort of workers who can be anywhere in the world. You're placing bids. And in some ways, it's a bit like a worldwide race to the bottom, because obviously you can undercut, you can go cheaper, you can say I can do it in 24 hours, whereas someone else could only do it in 2 weeks. So,
but that sounds like you are cheating other people out of the money. But you're not necessarily, are you, Jamie, cheating other individuals by undercutting them? You are cheating corporations and big organisations who are making profit for the directors of those companies. I mean, is it so terrible that, I can offer a service for £10 that my agent might charge £50 for?
Yeah, I think that's certainly one way of looking at it. I guess the major issues with it are in terms of regulation and policy. We are not making policy for these kinds of jobs, and in fact, in a way, they are unregulated. I know of people who still do work for something called Copify, which is a very similar type of thing, which is basically you write copy and you get paid per word for it. And it can be from anything, it's actually intensely dull because lots and lots of the time it's just people selling fittings and needing copy written about the fittings that they have in their house or whatever.
Jamie's obviously willing to burn his bridges there, isn't he?
But I
quite
think
firmly entrenched at Dennis Publishing, aren't you?
Yeah. Unless they do put me on Fittings Weekly next week. And so I think there's that's one issue is the regulation. I also think we're moving towards a kind of a world where you don't have a particular job anymore. You don't have a special skill. You're basically able to do anything. And as like globalization and more internet happens, they were saying about this Upwork is that within an hour you could have 100 people submitting their application to do the work. And basically the only kind of qualification or barrier to entry is having the internet.
Which is great, really, because it's a global meritocracy. All you need to do is has a brain, basically, and an internet connection, and you can get going. And I think when I think back to myself personally starting out and trying to find a job and, sending out your CVs and going to interviews, this seems like a really sort of exciting, liberating way of enter the workforce, because you can literally just get on the website, show your talent, show your skills, and off you go.
Cameron's nodding.
Well, I was going to say it's
and an internet connection.
I do have a brain and an internet connection.
Are you in favour?
It's quite a questionable how much is in my brain, but no, I was just going to touch on that as getting into, as we know, as being in the media industry, getting into the media industry is incredibly competitive. You've got to really work for free for a very long time before you start getting paid for things. So I think in that sense it's really good. If you're a talented writer, you can just jump past a lot of those hurdles and get through. But I feel as though I've learnt a lot since I've been as a journalist for 2 years, and I've learnt a hell of a lot being on the job. And I can't help but feel that some people might be missing out on that development through something like this. And I also think the competition is just insane. Like we were saying, within minutes of something going online, you've got 50 to 100 applicants pitching something. How do you choose between them?
I think that you're just going to choose the cheapest. That's the thing, and I don't think it's necessarily improving anyone's skills or like you're saying, there's no personal development. If I could basically run a business by just getting one person to do every other thing and then that's it, and never speak to them or never see them again. If it's for the cheapest amount of money and the highest amount of profit for me, where I think there needs to be more of a kind of holistic society angle to it. Yeah.
But I mean, there are also far bigger issues with this.
Go on then. Give us the bigger
things
issues.
Like governments won't be collecting the right levels of tax, for example. I mean, if this is the way we're going in terms of the world of work, if you've got someone sitting in their bedroom doing this work, it's very unlikely that you're paying the right level of tax or indeed any tax at all. So that's a big problem. And I think governments are going to have to start thinking about that.
Except
but also
it is
things
all kind of documented, isn't it, through the websites? If the websites have to declare who applied for the work, who they are, you just need more regulation to prove who they are. Yeah. It's actually easier, isn't it, to chase people
we
for tax?
Really struggle at the moment in terms of like working out how much freelance work goes on. I was listening to the Spectator podcast this week because I like to broaden my horizons.
Rivals.
They were talking about how the growth in the economy, lots and lots of people, when you match up the employment rate and the tax revenues, it looks like the growth should be higher than it actually is, and that's mainly because we're not taking the right amount or not tracking the amount of freelancers involved.
But also things like who's looking after these workers. We don't know who these workers are. We don't know how old they are. Is this just going to be a global sweatshop of totally unregulated work? And in terms of sort of security and pensions and all those things. And I think the biggest problem is actually the law is really going to struggle to keep up with this, because a lot of times you don't know who the employer is. So you don't really know, are they self-employed? You don't know who to go after.
And that's, it's sort of a bit like Airbnb, isn't it? Or any of those, or even Uber, and some of the court challenges they faced, where the argument for the principle of the company when it was set up allegedly is this is something you do in your spare time. Got a spare room, rent it out for 2 days a month. But in reality, people run their houses as businesses once the technology allows them to do that. And that's the thing, isn't it? What you're saying about workers' rights and pension contributions, it wouldn't matter if it was literally a case of someone who's got a job as a veterinary nurse once a month does a graphic for someone. The problem is if they're a full-time graphic designer working from their kitchen.
Yeah, I think it'd be kind of almost the opposite of the Airbnb thing. Is instead of it being you would do it in your spare time and then it turns into a full-time career, it almost seems like you would have the opposite of where people go into this thinking they're going to have a career and you would just end up doing it in your spare time. A, because of the amount of competition, and B, because I can just see people being massively undercharged for work.
I think the ingenuity angle is something that I quite enjoyed, in that There was a story in 2013 that I'm sure everyone remembers of this American guy who, for somewhere in the region of like 3 years, basically outsourced his job to someone in China and would just go into work every day and sit on Facebook and eBay because he'd paid this guy in China to do his work for him. And it lasted for 3 years, and then eventually they found out and fired him. But that as a concept, everyone laughed and was like, oh, this is really funny. With these types of things, that's not something that no one is standing over my shoulder checking that I'm writing what I say I'm writing. Yeah. So, Fittings Weekly, here I come.
But I suppose just to bring it back to Sarah O'Connor's piece, she started off the article and she was writing it very much in the kind of context of politicians increasingly putting up borders and starting trade wars and everyone becoming more isolationist. And actually she's pointing out that this huge globalization, this kind of new wave of globalization is going on and we need to think about it. And it kind of makes you think about, well, in the era of Trump and Brexit, is this in some ways going to create more animosity and isolationism if we are people are more likely to go to a worker in India who they can get the work done far more cheaper than someone in Britain. And I think and then the other idea of sort of workers coming to our borders and we want to close our borders to new workers coming in. So it is very, very interesting about how it's going to play out, I think.
And of course Sarah Connor would know all about the future because she was in the Terminator. Sticking with technology for our next story, your next, Cameron, what do you think this week will be remembered for?
Well, are we witnessing a war of the virtual worlds?
There are about just over 100 people in the room, and everybody has a different reaction to the word Apple. Mine is separation anxiety from the iPhone that got stolen last Sunday. There might be some people who grew up in a bucolic idyll in Somerset or with nature. There may be some people in the room who had something very savoury for lunch, and every time I say the word apple, you're just getting thirstier and thirstier and you just want a cold-pressed glass of juice. This simple word, this simple object, can mean different things to different people, but also different things to the same person at different times. And what I would posit is that culture is essentially the stack of emotions, knowledge, facts, media, experiences that are locked within an object and shared willingly or not by a collective.
Well, it already sounds like a story of the week to me, Cameron. Okay, let's go down the rabbit hole. That was Colm Elliott Kelly starting his TEDx talk on artificial intelligence and what it means for culture. You can find more of that at ted.com. Cameron, what?
Yes, it was a little bit difficult finding an audio clip to go along with my story this week, but you'll come to see there is a link in just a moment. So my story of the week is researchers from Oxford University have created an AI algorithm that can simulate human behaviour and can also, once put with other virtual humans, can create wars.
That's about you, Felicity, but
prevent them.
Well,
isn't that the
in the research they have found that the AIs will create wars, but the idea is that if we figure out how a virtual human interacts with other virtual humans and why they cause wars, then we might be able to prevent them at a later date.
Okay, why not just study the interactions of real humans? I mean, we've got social media, that's a representative sample of a lot of people, isn't it? Why bother creating an algorithm of fake humans to see why wars happen?
The idea is with an algorithm, you can feed it lots and lots and lots of information, and you can run multiple simulations of what would happen if you take social media, for instance, or how wars have happened in the past. You can kind of see what events have happened and why did this happen, what happened, and how can we prevent it. But with an AI, you can simulate multiple outcomes from one instance.
But hold it, you can't, can you, even if you're a very clever fellow at Oxford University, explain to a computerized algorithm the charisma of Adolf Hitler? I mean, that's a very specific thing. You sort of had to be there, didn't you?
It's almightily specific, and I think that's why some experts believe the AI is a start of an interesting idea, but it's by no means ready at the moment. So it is fed with information of previous conflicts. So what they actually did to this AI is they fed it information about the troubles in Northern Ireland and based a lot of the conflicts on that. But if you want to get an accurate representation of world wars or religious wars, you need to feed it so much data.
And just briefly before we discuss this, what did they find out about the troubles in Northern Ireland by asking a computer about it?
Well, they didn't simulate the troubles in Northern Ireland. They simulated their own conflicts based on data from the troubles. along with riots in
But that
India
means
from
what? Like
2002.
telling the computer that half of it is Protestant and half of it is Catholic, or a
Yeah,
sort
sort
of
of. Well, they kind of split it down into religious beliefs. So what they found is in 20% of instances of where these virtual humans reacted with each other and they've got differing beliefs, there was violence.
It's a bit like The Sims, isn't it?
It's just like The Sims, but for serious people.
I actually think it's a really fascinating use of, and actually these predictive tools are being used all the time. Like in policing in Chicago, for instance, at the moment they use predictive tools in order to work out where crimes are going to be committed, kind of like Minority Report, but less Tom Cruisey. I think what happens a lot of the time is that people believe in data too strongly because data doesn't reflect reality, and that's the problem. Is that if we're feeding data into this model, we are basically saying that everything that we have created and come up with in terms of the data set is the truth, and that's just not the fact.
You end up with policies like stop and search, which are hugely problematic.
Right, and we've discussed that sort of thing on the show before, haven't we, Felicity? So kind of implicit bias, like who is programming the machine might end up with a set of data that creates stereotypes over, or reinforces stereotypes over wealth or race or whatever.
That's not a reason not to do it. What that is a reason for is open source data and understanding, and hoping that these models are actually giving explanations for why violence occurs, not just saying here is something that bad is about to happen and let's fix it.
Doesn't it, Felicity, take away almost like our responsibility as human beings for individually using our own brains, looking back through history and working out what we might do to prevent future conflicts based on what we've learned?
I think it makes me feel totally like a powerless lemming or sim, and like all my behaviour is totally predictable and premeditated, and I find that quite scary, as if sort of centuries of religious violence can suddenly just be explained away by technology. I find really, really frightening. And I also just think human society is way too complex, and there must be so many interconnected elements going on that I think someone wrote in an article on The Atlantic actually that he was very uneasy with this, and you could only really sort of say it would give an opinion. I don't think it can actually accurately predict what's going to happen. But there's also the idea that it could be really useful, perhaps. I mean, if you're a leader of a very secular or Christian country and you suddenly have a huge swathe of Muslim immigrants who are coming in, and you had certain AI scenarios that like an empirical tool that could tell you, well, if you do this option A, this is going to happen. If you do this option B, that could foster some great understanding. But I think it also presupposes that leaders and politicians want to stop religious violence, rather than in some cases it might be advantageous to them. And I also just think religious violence and all sorts of horrible, the attack in Pittsburgh, for example, that we've seen this week. I mean, propaganda and fake news propagated by people like Trump, I think that's what we've got to tackle at the moment now. I'm not sure AI can help us with that.
That's an interesting example, isn't it, Cam? Because actually, if in the future people use a computer model to say, right, we let in so many Muslim immigrants and this situation is likely to happen, that in itself, that decision, using a computer model, could then lead to an unpredictable, not modelable uprising from the population or the migrants.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it could do. But what is interesting from what the researchers have found, I say interesting because when you say it out loud, it actually seems really obvious. They basically said what the simulations have so far pointed out is that when you have people of differing opinions, differing strong opinions, this is when we start to see violence. So they say, to stop violence, just stop seeing people as a threat. And it's a lot easier said than done than to stop seeing people as a threat. I think it kind of points to that we should have potentially greater integration.
Models are being used for not necessarily in religious violence, but in things like water. So we've talked about on this podcast before the concept of like water wars in the future being fights over resources and stuff. And there are models now that are putting in things like climate data and where people are to look at flashpoints for resource, like fights over resources. And that can be really positive because that is an AI saying, hey, look at where the water resources are. Look at how many people there are. If the climate is going up like this, we need to do something about this. And if you look at how much money that the UN or governments spend on the military in comparison to peacekeeping, it's nuts. Like the UN spends like 1% of its budget on peacekeeping, and it can do like a really good job.
Yeah, but I think with climate change and dwindling resources, that's a brand new territory for us where I think think AI and technology definitely could play a part. But religious violence, we've had that for centuries. And I think we don't need AI, we just need history. We just need to remember the lessons from history. I mean, there's a historian called Linda Colley, very famous, who wrote a book about British identity. It's called Britain's Forging a Nation. It's brilliant. And she said that British identity has always came about after the Act of Union in 1707, that Britain was a Protestant state and it defined itself against a largely Catholic Europe and a massive rivalry with France. So we know all this. We know where religious violence comes from. We know how obsessed we are with identity. We just need to stop being so ignorant about the past and start thinking about how we're going to get...
Yes, that's the case, and we can look at history and they'll give us an idea, but what an AI could do, it can't do it just at the moment, but again, with AI research, it's about what we could achieve within the next 2 years or 5 years or whatever. If we feed it lots of information, lots of documents, then we might get scenarios that we maybe haven't seen before, or scenarios that may have happened hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago that may rear their head soon, and we can take preventative measures. So that's the kind of the way that AI is at the moment. It's not about they've released something and it's going to work straight away. It's about here's a concept, we've got it working, soon it might be able to help us in the future.
But isn't all data history?
Yeah.
I mean, history is data.
Yeah.
So you're not saying don't use it. I mean, the Cameron system is taking...
But I'm saying we already have history. We already, like you say, the history that we have is our data that we're presumably feeding this AI with. So in some ways, I think it's slightly redundant.
I think it's the opposite. I think, in fact, actually, we can benefit from using both the AI models and us looking back. Like, we can protect against things flashpoints that we maybe aren't aware of coming up, because history is all about looking back over it and different people adding their own input and their own views.
I just think the problem today is that no one is looking back at history. We only need to look at the mess of the EU and our total lack of ignorance about the Second World War and how easily a conflict like that can start again.
Maybe that's where an AI comes into it, though. Because if we just use that as
if we use artificial intelligence as just
textbooks,
guys.
To bring this down to earth, I was in a steam room yesterday with a hen party.
It's a hard life.
And they were chatting and I was listening, and they said, we went to the Tower of London last weekend, and she said, if you want to understand everything about what's going on in Syria, you just need to go to the Tower of London and see what we got up to in our history.
I like it.
I thought quite cerebral for a hen party, but they were at a spa. Jamie, your turn. What's your story of the week?
Was this the week that we saw the demise of the dedicated followers of fashion?
Good. You up to the gym? No, I'm just going shopping in my
activewear. Buying groceries in my activewear. Activewear. Having coffee with my friends in my activewear. Activewear.
Going to the movies in my activewear.
Get a manicure in my activewear. Showing off my baby in my activewear. I drink Coke Zero in my activewear.
Waiting for the bus in my activewear.
Buying activewear in my activewear.
That was Australian sketch group Skitbox. You can see the full video on YouTube. Jamie, I guess we're talking about activewear.
Actually, I was going to go for the Syrian civil war, but I guess we got the wrong clip.
Athleisure, some people call it. Alan Partridge called it sports casual.
Yes.
Why are we talking about it?
This week there was a very interesting article in The Atlantic talking about basically the rise of athleisure. I think initially when it came in, I mean, some people have tracked it back to 1997, but generally, I think from what we have seen around us, or what you can be aware of, is kind of from 2010 onwards. People thought it was a fad, a trend.
Give us a definition, because some people are thinking, what is activewear?
The dictionary defines athleisure as casual clothing designed to be worn for both exercising and for general use. However, as the skit showed, a lot of people are wearing it without the necessary desire to... I mean, I think that's quite a crude generalisation, but a lot of people wear athleisure now without actually going to the gym and are more wearing it as a statement of fashion, and also for giving off the kind of who they are. I'm an active person, I want to go out and like better my body, etc.
And what did this article teach you?
That initially what people thought it was just another trend, like flares or your jumper today.
How very dare you.
And I think that now actually it's more of it has been seen now to be an evolution of clothing and an evolution of the way people wear things, from moving from supreme comfortability, because it's basically decimating the fashion industry. Everything now is geared towards geared towards this way of wearing, and it's becoming kind of it's everywhere.
Yeah, so the article, Felicity, basically said athleisure is now all fashion.
Yeah, which is just such a problem for me. I mean, I think his concluding remark is athleisure isn't the future of fashion, it's the whole damn thing. But it's not fashion, it's the antithesis of fashion, and I think it's so sad. I mean, just go to LA. I mean, I've never been to LA personally, but
Sure.
everyone in
Great
LA is wearing Lululemon, you know, and they love Lululemon, and Lululemon is a huge business right now, and it's making loads of money.
And that was
but
the fashion brand that was built off the back of yoga style.
Yoga. This guy who went to a yoga class and was like, we should all be wearing yoga pants. But it's killing off style and individuality and creativity. And I mean, Balenciaga and Dior would just be rolling in their graves. You know, these incredible designers who came up with beautiful shapes and materials and fabrics and patterns, and we're just going to lose that. However, conversely, I'm very torn on this because I'd like to make the point
that you can't do yoga in a ball gown?
Yeah, of course. I do that every Wednesday. But in terms of women and fashions for women, and the fact that over the centuries they've had to wear very restrictive, oppressive clothing, so whalebone corsets, you know, high heels, like binding of feet in China, which is just so horrendous. I think the rise of women wearing trainers and more comfortable, practical clothing can only be applauded as a really, really good thing. So I'm very torn on this issue.
Cameron.
I find that interesting because it's almost, I can't help but think that athleisure is, it kind of brings the clothing itself that's relatively unisex, isn't it? You've not got, that's clearly a men's style and that's clearly a women's style. It does bring it together. So,
but not necessarily less objectifying, because again, as pointed out in the article, your butt looks good.
Yeah,
you know, when you're wearing yoga clothes, that's the idea. If you've got a fit body, show it off.
That's what I was going to get onto. Is that I can't help but think a lot of especially yoga pants. Or do we call them yoga trousers in England? I don't know.
Please let's call them yoga trousers.
Yoga trousers.
Hello, fine sir. Hello. Could I trouble you for a pair of yoga trousers in your department store?
Well, yoga trousers really do make one's bottom look fantastic. So yoga trousers, yes, they're clearly sexualising.
I also think the problem with yoga trousers beyond the
discomfortability,
beyond, I think is actually that while it breaks down barriers and allows, you know, women to wear or men to wear comfortable clothing outside all over, and like you were saying, it is also in itself exclusive. Like, I'm sure that not every woman wants their bum to be out on show like that, and so in that way, if that's all that they're being given in the fashion world, or that's the big trend to go after, it does still exclude some people.
What about the thesis of the article, which said the reason that all clothes are athleisure now is because it's more a realization that the author came to that his whole wardrobe, which he thinks of as just kind of casual clothes, actually all started as workwear or sportswear when you look into it. So he gave the example of Levi's jeans being workwear for people out on building sites and in, you know, mining materials and whatever, and has now become the thing you wear if you're a bit of a slouch.
And there's a big trend for workwear at the moment. You know, Carhartt jackets. People are going to like what are effectively builders merchants in terms of the things that they can buy to wear then out on the street. So like big heavy duty shirts, big heavy duty jackets as fashion. You know, brands like Carhartt and others.
Never works the other way, does it? You never see builders on a building site wearing Uggs.
No.
I don't mind that. I think because fashion, the evolution of fashion, you're always borrowing and taking inspiration from different people and different areas and times in history and all that sort of thing. And as long as it's evolving, that's great. But I think it's when it becomes very uniform and we're all just going around in our yoga trousers that I think that's the problem. And I think fashion has to have that style and individuality and
but
that kind
Jamie
of, you know,
and Cameron
and
myself are all wearing jeans. I mean, that has kind of become the uniform, hasn't it? You can get away with them as smart casual these days.
It's very, no offence, guys, but come on, step it up a bit.
I put a lot of effort into this morning.
Really?
No, I didn't.
Cameron's going to come in with his yoga trousers tomorrow, just for you.
I don't own a pair of yoga trousers. But I can't help but think if you went into any startup in London that every startup calls itself energetic and forward-thinking and all that crap, they would all be wearing athleisure. And it would all be kind of these vibrant colours, yoga trousers, tank tops and everything, because they're kind of showing that they're, you know, athletic and they've got energy and they want to move the company forward. And I just think it's uniform.
Except
it's not
boring.
Except in the boardroom. I mean, that is interesting, isn't it? Like, the more senior people get within a business, even if they started, you know, in the Zuckerberg style hoodie and jeans, by the time they're dealing with millions or billions, they're wearing suits.
But that might change, you know, as boardrooms. That's what. Well, I mean, that's I guess the whole point of this podcast. I think in the future, as more women get into boardrooms, as younger people get into boardrooms, there will be a drive to saying, hey, actually, if I want to look and feel comfortable, and this is a company that really does achieve things, and we want to give over this impression that you can be whoever you want to be, then maybe athleisure will become more a part of boardrooms.
Will we have barristers wearing their yoga pants, though?
They might have to be called yoga trousers in that setting. I think the other thing, and I think one issue with it in general, is that we are pushing there's only one way to look. And we're talking about things like, on this podcast, we've talked about the kind of biome stuff, which is like Silicon Valley really looking at the human form as being something to improve and make more efficient, and use all of these words. And I think athleisure is a part of that, which is basically saying that there is only one way to look, and pushing this active lifestyle as being the number one way to be. And I think that's a slight problem, because not everyone has to go to the gym to be healthy. Not everyone has to fit into these kind of barriers in order to live a good and proper life.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Thank you as well for explaining the concept of the show to me. There's no point me being here at all. That is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Jamie Timson, to Cameron Tait, and to Felicity Capon, who is available online to do all your odd jobs for £7.66 an hour. Why not don your favourite yoga trousers and spend an evening binge listening to our back catalogue? Just search for The Week Unwrapped on your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. I've been Olly Mann. Thank you to our sponsor, Barclays Corporate Banking. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.